On May 12, 2008, at precisely 2:28 p.m. local time, the Earth unleashed its fury in one of the most devastating natural disasters in modern Chinese history. A powerful earthquake struck Sichuan Province in southwestern China, measuring 8.0 on the Richter scale, according to the China Earthquake Administration. The U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, recorded it as a magnitude 7.9. But regardless of the numbers, the earthquake's strength was monumental. Its epicenter was located in Sichuan County, approximately 50 miles northwest of Chengdu, the provincial capital. This rural area, surrounded by steep mountains and narrow valleys, became the epicenter of destruction. The quake was caused by the movement along the Longmingshan Fault, a tectonic plate boundary where the Indian and Eurasian plates collide. This fault zone has been geologically active for millions of years, and the immense pressure between these two plates finally gave way, resulting in the massive release of energy. The seismic event caused the ground to rupture along a fault line stretching nearly 240 kilometers, about 150 miles. In some places, the ground shifted laterally by as much as 9 meters, nearly 30 feet. The force released by this earthquake was equivalent to the detonation of multiple nuclear bombs, and its impact was felt across East Asia. What made this earthquake particularly devastating was not just its magnitude, but its shallow depth of only 19 kilometers, about 12 miles. Shallow earthquakes tend to cause more severe surface shaking, amplifying their destructive power. The tremors lasted for about 2 minutes, an eternity for those caught in its grip. It wasn't just a local event. The earthquake sent shock waves across a wide area. People as far away as Beijing, Shanghai, and even Hanoi, Vietnam, over 1,500 kilometers away, reported feeling the ground tremble. The seismic activity didn't just shake the ground, it shook the lives of millions. The towns and villages near the epicenter, including Beichuan, Yingxiu, and Duzhengyan, bore the brunt of the devastation. In Wenchuan County, where the epicenter was located, up to 80% of structures were either damaged or completely destroyed. Schools, homes, hospitals, and government buildings crumbled into heaps of rubble, trapping countless individuals beneath. Roads cracked open, bridges collapsed, and power lines snapped, plunging many areas into darkness. In the span of just a few minutes, bustling communities were reduced to ruin. The earthquake's timing added to the catastrophe. Striking in the early afternoon, many children were at school and workers were inside office buildings. Tragically, thousands of students were killed when their school buildings collapsed, exposing critical flaws in construction standards. This led to widespread anger and heartbreak among parents, who would later refer to these poorly built schools as tofu buildings due to their weak and unstable structures. Within minutes of the main quake, the region was hit by a series of aftershocks, some exceeding a magnitude of 6.0. These aftershocks not only caused additional destruction, but also made it nearly impossible for survivors to seek safety. Landslides triggered by the tremors buried entire villages, dammed rivers, and created quake lakes that pose new threats of flooding. For those who survived the initial shock, the danger was far from over. As news of the earthquake spread, a sense of dread gripped the nation. Sichuan Province, known for its breathtaking natural beauty and vibrant culture, was now the epicenter of unimaginable tragedy. For the millions of people affected, life as they knew it had been irrevocably changed. The earthquake wasn't just a geological event, it was a humanitarian crisis that would require an unprecedented response. This catastrophic moment marked the beginning of a period of intense rescue and recovery efforts. But for the people of Sichuan, it was also the beginning of a long and painful journey to rebuild their lives. The Sichuan earthquake of May 12, 2008, was not a random event, but the result of complex geological forces at work over millions of years. To understand why this disaster occurred, one must delve into the tectonic processes that shaped the region and made it a hotspot for seismic activity. Sichuan Province is situated near the edge of the Tibetan Plateau, one of the most geologically active regions in the world. The plateau itself was formed as a result of the collision between the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates, a process that began approximately 50 million years ago. This slow-motion collision continues today, with the Indian plate pushing northward at a rate of about 5 centimeters, 2 inches per year. This movement generates immense stress along fault lines in the region, particularly the Longmingshan Fault, which runs along the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau and cuts through Sichuan. The Longmingshan Fault is a thrust fault, meaning that one side of the fault is forced upward over the other due to tectonic pressure. Over time, stress builds up along the fault line until it surpasses the strength of the rock, causing the fault to rupture and release energy in the form of an earthquake. In the case of the Sichuan earthquake, the rupture occurred along a 240-kilometer, 150-mile segment of the fault, with the ground on either side shifting violently. This seismic event was classified as a megathrust earthquake, one of the most powerful types of earthquakes. These occur when a massive slab of the Earth's crust is pushed upward, releasing an enormous amount of energy. The Sichuan quake released an estimated 3 exajoules of energy, equivalent to the detonation of nearly 500 million tons of TNT. The ground shaking caused by this release of energy was intense, with peak ground accelerations exceeding 1 g-force in some areas. This level of shaking is strong enough to toss objects into the air and bring down even well-built structures. The timing of the earthquake was particularly unfortunate. It struck at 2:28 in the afternoon when many people were indoors, increasing the likelihood of fatalities and injuries. The rupture was also shallow, occurring at a depth of 19 kilometers, 12 miles. Shallow quakes tend to be far more destructive because the energy they release is concentrated close to the surface, where buildings, infrastructure, and people are located. The geology of the region also played a critical role in amplifying the quake's destructive power. The Sichuan Basin, located just east of the Tibetan Plateau, is filled with loose sedimentary layers that are prone to liquefaction during strong earthquakes. Liquefaction occurs when saturated soils lose their strength and behave like a liquid due to intense shaking. This phenomenon caused buildings to sink or tilt in many areas, further contributing to the devastation. Another factor that worsened the impact was the steep and rugged terrain surrounding the epicenter in Wenchuan County. The mountains in this region are geologically young and composed of fractured rock, making them highly susceptible to landslides during seismic events. The earthquake triggered thousands of landslides, some of which buried entire villages and blocked major rivers. These landslides created what are known as quake lakes, where debris dams rivers, forming temporary reservoirs. In some cases, these quake lakes threatened to burst, putting downstream communities at risk of catastrophic flooding. The earthquake's massive energy release and widespread destruction highlight the inherent vulnerability of the region. Despite being located in a seismically active zone, much of the area was unprepared for such a disaster. Many of the buildings that collapsed were constructed with inadequate materials and methods, unable to withstand the intense shaking. Schools in particular suffered disproportionately high levels of destruction, leading to tragic loss of life among children. In the hours immediately following the earthquake, aftershocks began to ripple through the region. These secondary quakes, some exceeding a magnitude of 6, added to the destruction and hampered rescue efforts. The strongest aftershock occurred on May 27th, measuring 6.4 in magnitude, further destabilizing the already fragile region. Over 178,000 aftershocks were recorded in the months following the main quake, a grim reminder of the ongoing geological instability. The Sichuan earthquake was a stark demonstration of the forces at play beneath the Earth's surface. It revealed the immense power of tectonic processes and the fragile balance that exists between the natural world and human settlements. For the people of Sichuan, this understanding came at a tremendous cost as the ground beneath their feet betrayed them in one of the most devastating ways imaginable. The Sichuan earthquake of May 12, 2008, brought widespread devastation, reshaping entire cities and leaving deep scars on the communities it touched. The quake's epicenter, located near Wenchuan County, saw unparalleled destruction, but its effects rippled out across Sichuan Province and beyond, impacting millions of lives. Wenchuan County, home to over 100,000 people, bore the brunt of the earthquake. Entire towns were leveled within seconds as buildings collapsed under the immense forces of the quake. Public facilities, schools, and hospitals were among the hardest hit, their poorly constructed structures unable to withstand the seismic waves. In Sichuan County, another area near the epicenter, over 80% of the buildings were reduced to rubble. The picturesque town of Sichuan, nestled in a valley, was buried under landslides triggered by the quake, erasing it from the map. Larger cities like Dujiangyan, Mianyang, and Chengdu also faced significant damage. In Dujiangyan, a city known for its ancient irrigation system, modern buildings collapsed alongside historical structures. Mianyang, home to millions, saw entire residential complexes pancaked. trapping thousands of people under debris. Even Chengdu, the provincial capital located over 90 kilometers, 56 miles from the epicenter, experienced substantial destruction. Though Chengdu's modern infrastructure fared better than rural areas, older buildings, particularly in densely populated neighborhoods, suffered heavy damage. The human toll was staggering. Official records later confirmed that over 69,000 people lost their lives, but the real number may be even higher. Another 17,575 were reported missing and presumed dead. Beyond this, 374,640 people sustained injuries, many of them life-altering. In some of the hardest-hit areas, entire families were wiped out. Schools, tragically, became the sites of some of the greatest loss of life. In Sichuan Middle School, over 1,000 students and teachers perished when the building collapsed. Across Sichuan Province, it is estimated that as many as 5,335 children died in their schools, sparking outrage and calls for accountability over substandard construction practices. These poorly built tofu dreg schools, so named for their fragile, crumbling materials, became symbols of the tragedy. The earthquake severely damaged critical infrastructure, isolating many towns and villages from the outside world. Roads leading to Wenchuan and other affected areas were destroyed by landslides, cutting off access for rescue teams. Bridges collapsed, including the Zipingpu Bridge near Dujiangyan, severing key transportation links. Rail lines were warped, tunnels collapsed, and highways were rendered impassable. Even the Chengdu Shuangliu International Airport experienced disruptions, further delaying relief efforts. Communication networks were also crippled, telephone lines were cut, and mobile towers toppled, leaving millions unable to contact loved ones or call for help. Electricity and water supplies were interrupted in vast swaths of the province. Hospitals, many of which were damaged or destroyed, were overwhelmed with casualties. Makeshift triage centers were set up in streets and parks, but the lack of medical supplies and personnel made it impossible to treat everyone in need. As if the earthquake itself were not enough, its aftermath brought additional hazards. Landslides triggered by the quake buried entire villages and blocked major rivers, creating a series of quake lakes. The largest of these, Tangjiashan Lake, formed when landslides blocked the Jian River near Beichuan County. The rapidly rising water levels posed a grave risk to downstream communities, with fears of catastrophic flooding. Tens of thousands of residents had to be evacuated, as engineers and soldiers worked tirelessly to drain the lake and stabilize the debris dam. The destruction of dams and reservoirs in the region added to the dangers. The Zipingpu Dam, located just a few kilometers from the epicenter, sustained significant structural damage. Had the dam failed, it could have unleashed a devastating flood, further compounding the loss of life and property. In addition to the physical devastation, the earthquake left an emotional scar on the people of Sichuan. Families were torn apart, with many losing loved ones in the blink of an eye. Survivors faced the daunting task of identifying bodies and saying goodbye to those they had lost, often in mass graves or hurried cremations due to health concerns. Cultural heritage sites were also affected. The ancient Dujiangyan irrigation system, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, sustained damage, though its primary structures remained intact. Temples, pagodas, and other historical landmarks crumbled, taking with them centuries of history and cultural significance. The scale of destruction shocked not only Sichuan but the entire nation. Within hours of the quake, news of the disaster spread across China, prompting an outpouring of grief and solidarity. Flags were lowered to half-mast and public events were cancelled as the nation mourned its losses. Millions tuned in to broadcasts of rescue efforts, hoping for news of survivors. The immediate aftermath of the Sichuan earthquake revealed the fragility of human life in the face of nature's fury. Cities were shattered, lives were lost, and families were torn apart, leaving a province and a nation reeling from the devastation. But amid the destruction, the resilience of the human spirit began to shine through, setting the stage for the monumental rescue and relief efforts that would follow. The aftermath of the Sichuan earthquake on May 12, 2008 revealed the immense challenges of recovery and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. As the ground stopped shaking, the true scope of the disaster came into focus, setting in motion one of the largest relief efforts in modern history. This final part examines the aftermath of the earthquake, the reconstruction efforts, the long-term impact on affected communities, and the enduring lessons learned. In the hours following the quake, China faced a monumental task: rescuing survivors, caring for the injured, and providing shelter to millions who had lost their homes. The Chinese government, recognizing the unprecedented scale of the disaster, declared a national emergency and mobilized tens of thousands of soldiers, police officers, and volunteers. Helicopters, trucks, and even makeshift rafts were employed to reach isolated areas, often navigating treacherous terrain left unstable by landslides. Time was of the essence. The first 72 hours after an earthquake are critical for rescuing those trapped under debris. Rescuers worked tirelessly, often digging with their hands or rudimentary tools, as heavy machinery could not access many remote locations. Heroic stories emerged, such as the rescue of a young girl pulled from the rubble of Sichuan Middle School after 70 hours. Yet for every life saved, there were countless others lost, their absence leaving families shattered. The disaster prompted an outpouring of support from within China and across the globe. Domestically, citizens and businesses donated money, supplies, and time. In a rare moment of unity, people from all walks of life set aside differences to contribute to the relief efforts. Telethons raised billions of yuan, while food, water, and clothing poured into Sichuan from every corner of the country. Internationally, offers of assistance came from over 100 countries and organizations. Nations such as Japan, the United States, and Russia sent rescue teams, medical personnel, and equipment. The World Health Organization and the Red Cross provided medical supplies and expertise, while the United Nations coordinated logistics to ensure aid reached those most in need. This level of international cooperation underscored the shared humanity that disasters bring to light. One of the most pressing challenges was providing shelter for the over 4 million people left homeless by the earthquake. Temporary tent cities sprang up almost overnight, dotting fields and open spaces across Sichuan. While these shelters provided immediate relief, they lacked basic amenities such as clean water, sanitation, and adequate protection from the elements. Diseases such as dysentery and respiratory infections began to spread, adding another layer of urgency to the relief efforts. The government and aid organizations worked quickly to establish more stable solutions. Prefabricated housing units were erected in large numbers, providing a semblance of normalcy for displaced families. Schools and clinics were set up within these settlements, ensuring children could continue their education and medical needs could be addressed. However, the psychological scars of the disaster were harder to mend. Counseling services were introduced, focusing on children who had witnessed the loss of friends, teachers, and family members. The scale of destruction required a comprehensive, long-term approach to rebuilding. In September 2008, the Chinese government unveiled a massive reconstruction plan with a budget of over 1 trillion yuan, equivalent to approximately $146 billion at the time. The plan aimed to rebuild homes, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure with an emphasis on safety and sustainability. One of the most ambitious projects was the relocation of entire towns. For instance, the devastated town of Sichuan was rebuilt on a new site several kilometers away, with modern earthquake-resistant structures. The old town was preserved as a memorial, a haunting reminder of the lives lost and the power of nature. Other towns and villages were similarly relocated or rebuilt with improved designs to minimize future risks. In addition to physical reconstruction, the government prioritized economic recovery. Subsidies were provided to farmers to replace lost livestock and replant crops, while small businesses received financial assistance to restart operations. Larger industries, such as manufacturing and tourism, were incentivized to invest in the region, creating jobs and stimulating the local economy. The earthquake left deep emotional scars on survivors, many of whom lost multiple family members. The grieving process was compounded by the sheer scale of the disaster, with entire communities mourning their dead. In response, memorials and monuments were erected across Sichuan. Annual commemorations on May 12th serve as both a remembrance of those who perished and a testament to the resilience of the survivors. In Sichuan, the remains of the old town were turned into a national earthquake memorial site, drawing visitors from around the world. Schools, such as Juyuan Middle School, where hundreds of students lost their lives, became places of pilgrimage, with flowers, photos, and messages left in tribute to the young lives cut short. The Sichuan earthquake exposed weaknesses in building codes and disaster preparedness, prompting significant reforms. Stricter construction standards were implemented nationwide, with an emphasis on ensuring schools, hospitals, and other public buildings could withstand future earthquakes. Emergency response protocols were also overhauled, with greater investment in training, equipment, and public awareness campaigns. The disaster also highlighted the importance of international cooperation in addressing large-scale emergencies. China's openness to foreign assistance during the crisis marked a significant shift in its approach to humanitarian aid, fostering closer ties with global partners. The Sichuan earthquake was one of the most devastating natural disasters in China's history, but it also demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit, from the heroic efforts of rescuers to the generosity of strangers. The response to the disaster showcased humanity at its best. While the scars of the earthquake remain, the people of Sichuan have rebuilt their lives and communities with determination and hope. The legacy of the earthquake is a reminder of both the fragility of life and the strength that emerges in the face of adversity. For those who lived through it, May 12, 2008, will forever be a day of sorrow and remembrance, but also a testament to the power of resilience and the enduring bonds of humanity.